Britt. Come with me, the lone rancher who saved her when no one else did. Clara sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the worn wooden floor. The sunlight spilled softly through the thin curtains, painting patterns of gold across the room. For a moment, she wished she could believe the warmth of the sun meant safety, but she knew better. Safety had never been part of her life. Britt. Her home, which should have been a place of comfort, felt like a cage. Each corner seemed heavy with unspoken threats, every creak in the floorboards a warning. Britt. She hugged her knees to her chest and tried to imagine herself anywhere else. Life had not been kind to Clara. Britt. Her mother had passed away when she was 10, leaving a silence in the house that was soon filled by her stepfather. At first, she had tried to convince herself he was just strict, that he only wanted her to be responsible and disciplined. But over time, his sharp words and sudden anger had grown worse. He yelled at small mistakes and punished her for things she had no control over. Britt. Clara learned quickly that keeping her head down and speaking little was the only way to survive. School was not much better, Britt. Her classmates whispered behind her back, judging her clothes, her quietness, the way she sometimes flinched when someone raised their voice. Teachers noticed, of course, but no one really understood the full story. But the guidance counselor asked polite questions and offered pamphlets, but Clara had learned long ago that talking to adults rarely changed anything. She had no one to confide in, no aunt, no uncle, no older siblings, and certainly no friends who lived near enough to help. Britt. Each day felt like a careful navigation through a minefield of emotions where one wrong step could trigger another outburst. She had begun to retreat into herself, finding small comforts in simple routines. Britt. Waking early to watch the sunrise over the town, walking to the nearby creek when the world felt too heavy, or losing herself in books borrowed from the tiny library in town. Reading gave her a window into a world that seemed kinder and safer than the one she lived in. Britt. She could imagine people who listened, who cared, who believed in the goodness of others. Those stories were her secret treasure, the only escape she had. Britt. Yet even as she found solace in the small pleasures, the fear never fully left her. She would flinch at loud noises, check the locks on doors multiple times, and jump at sudden knocks. Britt. Her mind constantly rehearsed ways to avoid trouble, ways to make herself invisible. It was exhausting, but she had grown used to it. Clara had become small in the world, shrinking herself in the hope that no one would notice her, that no one would hurt her. One evening, as the sky turned shades of orange and pink, Clara sat near the window, tracing the fading sunlight with her eyes. Britt. Her stepfather had been angry all day, his voice sharp and his movements unpredictable. She had been careful to avoid saying anything that might upset him, but just being there in his presence seemed to trigger his temper. Britt. She knew the moment she turned her back he might shout, or worse. The fear that had become a constant companion pressed against her chest, making it hard to breathe. Britt. Clara's thoughts wandered to the idea of leaving. She imagined stepping outside into the cool evening air and walking until she was far away from this house, far away from the anger and the fear. Britt. But each time she considered it, reality intruded. Where could she go? Britt. She had no friends willing to take her in, no relatives who would answer her calls. The town was small, people talked. Britt.
If she ran, she might only find herself in a different kind of danger.
Desperate. The thought was both terrifying and oddly comforting. If she stayed, the fear was constant, but if she left, maybe there was a chance for something better. As the shadows grew longer, Clara's mind wandered to the outskirts of town. Britt. She had heard stories of people who lived alone, people who had made a home far from the prying eyes of the town. One name kept coming back, Jack, the rancher who lived at the edge of the hills. Britt. He was known as quiet, a man who kept to himself, working the land and caring for his animals. Some whispered that he was gruff, even unapproachable. But Clara didn't care about whispers. She only knew that somewhere out there, someone lived far from the chaos of her world. But maybe, just maybe, there could be safety there. The evening air turned cooler, and Clara wrapped her arms around herself. But, She listened to the distant sounds of the town, the laughter from the park, the low hum of cars passing on the road, the faint bark of a dog. It all felt so far away, like another world she could never reach, Brit. And yet the idea of leaving, even for a moment, kept flickering in her mind like a candle in the dark. She longed for someone to notice her pain, to step in when everyone else looked away. Brit. She longed for kindness, for a simple gesture of understanding that would tell her she was not alone.
As she sat there, the sky now deep with stars, Clara realized something she had not dared to admit before. She wanted to be brave.
Brit. She wanted to take a step, even a small one, toward a life that didn't involve constant fear. But bravery was complicated when the world had taught you to be afraid of almost everything. Brit. She felt the weight of her own thoughts pressing down, making each breath heavy. The decision she faced was enormous, and yet something inside her whispered that she could not stay trapped forever. Brit. In that moment, Clara understood that her life had been a series of quiet battles. Battles to survive, to endure, to hide. She had grown strong in ways no one could see, resilient despite the shadows around her. But she had learned to notice small details, the warmth of sunlight, the rhythm of her own heartbeat, the sound of leaves rustling in the evening breeze. These were reminders that life, even in its darkest moments, had beauty to offer. And maybe, somewhere beyond the hills, there was a person who could help her find it again. As the night deepened, Clara made a quiet promise to herself. She would not give up. She would look for a way out, no matter how small the path seemed. She would keep hope alive, even if it was just a flicker. And she would pay attention, carefully, to anyone who might offer a hand. Someone like Jack, the lone rancher she had only heard about, might be the person who could step in when no one else would. With that thought, Clara finally allowed herself to rest. Tomorrow was uncertain, and the path ahead was unclear, but for the first time in a long while she felt a glimmer of possibility. It was fragile, like the first light of dawn on a cold morning. But it was enough, and for now, that was enough to keep her going. The next morning, Clara woke to the soft sounds of birds chirping outside her window. The sunlight spilled gently across her small room, and for a moment she felt a strange mixture of hope and fear. Yesterday she had made a promise to herself, a promise that she would look for a way to escape the fear that had shadowed her life for so long. But the thought of stepping into the unknown made her stomach tighten. She knew she could not remain trapped forever, yet the idea of leaving the only home she had ever known was frightening. As she quietly got dressed, she thought about the story she had heard of Jack, the rancher. He lived far from the town, out near the hills, where the roads were dusty and winding and few people traveled. Some said he never spoke to anyone unless he had to, and others whispered that he could be gruff or cold. But to Clara, none of that mattered. She did not need someone friendly or warm. She needed someone safe. Someone who would see her fear and not judge it. She remembered the way the sun had touched her face the night before, the way hope had flickered inside her chest. Desperate. Maybe Jack could be that person. Clara's heart pounded as she stepped outside. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the faint scent of grass and earth. She walked toward the edge of town, keeping close to the shadows of the buildings, careful to avoid anyone who might question her. Each step felt heavy, yet each step also felt necessary. She reminded herself that she had survived this long by being careful. by paying attention and by staying quiet when needed. Brit. Today, she would carry that carefulness with her, but she would also carry something new: courage. The path to Jack's ranch was longer than Clara had imagined. The town quickly gave way to open fields, and the narrow road twisted and turned, lined by tall grass and scattered trees. The wind whispered through the leaves, carrying with it a sense of freedom and uncertainty. Brit. Clara's mind raced with questions. What if Jack did not want to help her? Brit. What if he turned her away? What if she had misjudged him entirely? Brit. She shook her head, trying to quiet the fear. She had to try. Brit. She had to see if there was someone who could offer her safety, even if it was only for a little while. As she walked, the sun climbed higher, and Clara began to notice small details she had never paid attention to before. Brit. She saw a field of wildflowers swaying gently in the breeze, a small creek trickling along the edge of the road, and a group of birds taking flight in perfect harmony. Brit. These small glimpses of beauty gave her a quiet comfort, a reminder that life still held moments of peace, even in the midst of uncertainty. After what felt like hours, Clara finally saw a low wooden fence in the distance, and beyond it a modest ranch house, surrounded by open fields. Brit. Smoke rose from the chimney, curling into the clear blue sky. She hesitated for a moment, unsure if she should continue. Brit. Her nerves screamed at her to turn back, to retreat to the familiarity of the town, even with all its fear and pain. But she remembered her promise, the promise to herself, that she would seek a way out. Brit. Gathering her courage, she walked toward the gate, each step a silent declaration that she would not give up. Jack was outside, repairing a section of the fence. Brit. He was a tall man with broad shoulders and hands calloused from years of hard work. His hair was streaked with gray, and his face was lined with experience and quiet strength. Brit. When he noticed Clara approaching, he paused, his eyes narrowing slightly in surprise. Few people ever came to the ranch, and even fewer dared to walk up without warning. Brit. Clara stopped a few feet away, her hands trembling slightly. "Hello," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Brit. Jack looked at her carefully, sensing the unease in her posture. There was something different about this girl, something that spoke of fear, but also of determination. Brit. Desperate. He put down the tools he was holding and wiped his hands on a rag, studying her silently. I need help," Clara said, her voice wavering. Brit. I don't know where else to go. Brit. She looked down, ashamed of the fear that still shook her body. Jack remained silent, his gaze steady and unjudging. Brit. There was a long pause during which the wind rustled through the grass, and the distant sound of animals filled the air. Finally, Jack spoke. Brit. "You can come in," he said simply. His voice was calm, firm, and without any hint of mockery. Brit. Clara's heart leapt. She had expected anger, suspicion, or rejection, but not this. Brit. She nodded quickly, grateful beyond words, and followed him through the gate. The ranch smelled of wood, earth, and animals, a comforting, honest scent that was far different from the tension and fear of her home. Brit. Inside the house, Jack offered her a glass of water and a place to sit. Clara accepted quietly, still overwhelmed by the sudden shift from fear to safety. Brit. Jack didn't press her for details immediately. He simply gave her the space to breathe, to relax, to feel that for the first time in a long while, she was not in immediate danger. Brit. He moved around the house with the ease of someone used to solitude, opening cupboards, arranging simple meals, and making sure the place was comfortable. Clara watched him, noting the quiet strength in his actions, the patience in his movements. Brit. It was a stark contrast to the chaos she had left behind. Over the next few hours, Clara began to speak, slowly and cautiously. Brit. She told Jack about her home, her stepfather, the loneliness she had felt for years. She expected him to be shocked or angry, but instead, he listened. He asked gentle questions, offering guidance without judgment.
With each word she spoke, a weight lifted from her chest.
She realized how long it had been since someone had truly listened to her without interrupting or dismissing her fears. Jack's calm presence became a lifeline, and for the first time she felt a glimmer of trust. As the sun began to set, Clara sat on the porch, watching the sky turn shades of orange and pink. Jack stood nearby, tending to a small fire for the evening. The ranch felt alive yet peaceful, a place where she could breathe and think without constant fear pressing down. Clara realized that she had taken the first step toward a new life, one where she might not be alone, one where she might finally find safety and support. The night grew quiet, broken only by the distant sounds of animals settling down and the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. Clara felt exhaustion wash over her, but it was a good kind of tired, a tired that came from walking into the unknown, from taking a brave step, from daring to hope. She knew the journey ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges, questions, and difficult moments. But for the first time she felt she had a chance. She was not invisible anymore. Someone had seen her pain, and someone had offered her help when no one else had. Jack, standing a few feet away, watched her quietly. He knew that taking in someone like Clara was a responsibility, one that would test patience, judgment, and resilience. But he also understood the quiet truth. Some people could not wait for the world to notice their suffering. Sometimes they needed a hand, a place to stand, and someone willing to say, "You are not alone." In that moment, he silently vowed to provide that hand, that place, and that reassurance. As the stars began to dot the night sky, Clara felt a strange mixture of relief and anticipation. Relief for having found a safe place, and anticipation for the days ahead. Days where she might learn, grow, and heal. The ranch, once just a distant idea, had become a sanctuary.
And Jack, the lone rancher, had become the first person to offer her hope when the rest of the world had turned away. For Clara, this was more than just a temporary refuge.
It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where fear would not dictate every decision, where courage and trust could slowly take root. And though she knew she still had a long journey ahead, she also knew something important. She had taken the first step toward reclaiming her life. And sometimes that first step was the hardest and the most powerful of all. Clara awoke before sunrise, the soft pink light creeping across the ranch fields. For a moment she lay still, listening to the quiet hum of life around her, the faint calls of birds, the distant lowing of cows, and the gentle rustle of the wind through the grass. It felt almost unreal to be somewhere so peaceful, a place where danger didn't follow her at every step. But even in this calm, a knot of anxiety tightened in her chest. She knew she could not stay forever in the shadow of her fear. She had to face it somehow, and trust that the safety she had found was real. Jack was already outside, moving with quiet purpose among the animals. He noticed her awake and nodded briefly in greeting, his calm expression making Clara feel slightly braver. She dressed quickly and followed him to the barn, where the morning light streamed through gaps in the wooden walls. The smell of hay and the soft warmth of the sun on her skin brought a sense of grounding. Jack handed her a bucket and motioned toward the animals. "Help me with these first," he said, his voice steady and patient. Clara nodded, grateful for the simple task. It was work, yes, but it was honest and safe work, and it gave her mind a break from the constant swirl of fear and worry. As they worked, Clara noticed how naturally Jack moved around the ranch. His hands were strong and sure, his attention calm and focused. There was no anger here, no sudden shouts, No threatening presence. But it was a different kind of life, one that she could almost imagine belonging to. She hesitated, glancing at Jack, and noticed that he was watching her too, not with suspicion, but with quiet awareness. But it was the first time in a long while that someone had looked at her and simply seen her, without judgment or expectation. After the animals were fed, they moved to the house. But Clara helped prepare breakfast while Jack made coffee, the morning routine almost meditative in its simplicity. It was strange, she thought, how comforting it could feel just to exist alongside someone who neither expected anything from her nor demanded she hide herself. Jack asked a few questions about her life, but nothing intrusive, just enough to show interest, not to push her beyond what she could handle. Clara found herself speaking more freely than she had in years, telling small stories about school, the creek near her town, and the books she loved to read. Each word she shared felt like lifting a weight off her chest. As the sun climbed higher, Clara's thoughts inevitably returned to the stepfather she had left behind and the fear that had driven her to flee. She told Jack about him in bits and pieces, avoiding details she wasn't ready to confront. Jack listened carefully, nodding occasionally, offering gentle encouragement without ever rushing her. "You're safe here," he said at one point. The words were simple, but they struck her like a lifeline. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that for the first time in her life, someone meant it. Later in the morning, a knock sounded at the door. Clara froze, her heart leaping into her throat. She looked at Jack, and for the first time she saw the seriousness in his face. He moved to the door slowly, opened it just enough to peek outside, and then stepped back. A familiar but unwelcome presence loomed at the edge of the porch. Someone from the town, likely looking for her. Clara felt panic rise, threatening to undo all the calm she had found. Desperate, Jack turned to her, his voice low but firm. "Stay inside." "Lock the door." He moved with quiet speed, making sure she was safe. Clara obeyed, her hands trembling as she latched the door and pulled the curtains closed. She pressed her back against the wall, listening as Jack calmly spoke with the visitor outside. The words were muffled, but she could sense the authority and assurance in his tone. After a few tense minutes, the person left and the ranch returned to its quiet peace. Clara exhaled shakily, feeling a rush of relief and gratitude. "I won't let anyone hurt you here," Jack said, returning to her side. Clara nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. She had never known someone who could protect her so completely, who could step into a dangerous situation without fear. For the first time, she realized that it was possible to feel safe and cared for without shame or guilt. The days that followed settled into a careful routine. Clara and Jack worked together on the ranch, fixing fences, feeding animals, and tending to the fields. But it was hard work, and Clara often felt exhausted by the physical labor, but it was also liberating. For the first time, she felt her body and mind aligned in purpose. She began to learn the rhythms of ranch life, the patience required for animals, the respect for nature's pace, and the satisfaction of a day's honest work. In the quiet evenings, they would sit on the porch together, desperate.
Jack didn't ask her to speak if she didn't want to, and he didn't force explanations for the life she had left behind. Instead, he shared stories of the land, of the animals, and of the work he had done to maintain the ranch.
Clara listened, fascinated, and slowly began to open her heart. She started to feel a connection, not just to Jack, but to a world where trust, patience, and care could exist alongside hardship. One evening after a particularly long day of work, Clara hesitated before speaking. "Why? Why are you helping me?" she asked quietly. Jack looked at her, his face calm but thoughtful. "Because sometimes people need help,"
He said simply, "And if I can give it, I will."
You're not alone anymore.
Clara felt a lump in her throat. Brit, no one had ever said anything like that to her before. She realized how much she had longed to hear those words, and how powerful it felt to believe them. Brit. As the nights passed, Clara found herself sleeping more soundly. The nightmares that had plagued her in her old home began to fade, replaced by a quiet, restorative sleep. Brit. She started to trust Jack more fully, noticing small ways he cared for her safety, locking doors at night, making sure the animals were secure, and checking in on her without being overbearing. She began to understand that protection could come with kindness, not punishment. The turning point came one afternoon when Clara decided to explore a small trail near the ranch. Jack had warned her to be careful, but she felt confident enough to step outside her comfort zone. Brit. As she walked, she marveled at the beauty of the hills, the sound of the creek nearby, and the warmth of the sun on her skin. For the first time in years, she felt free. Truly free. Brit. When she returned, Jack was waiting, a small smile on his face. See, Brit? You can do it, he said. The encouragement, gentle but firm, made her chest swell with a pride she had never felt before. Brit. Through these small victories, Clara began to understand something profound. Survival was not just about avoiding danger. It was also about learning to trust, to act, and to believe that there were people willing to help. Brit. Jack's presence was a reminder that the world could be safe, that courage could grow even in the most unlikely places, and that sometimes a single act of kindness could change a life forever.
Weeks passed, and Clara's bond with Jack.
Brit. She began to see him not just as a protector, but as a mentor, someone who could guide her through life's uncertainties with patience and wisdom. She started to take responsibility for small tasks around the ranch on her own, feeling capable in ways she had never imagined. Brit. The fear that had once consumed her began to loosen its grip, replaced by a cautious but growing confidence. Clara knew she still had challenges ahead. Brit. Her past was not gone, and the world beyond the ranch would eventually demand answers and action. But for the first time, she felt she had a foundation to stand on. A place where she was safe, where she was seen, and where she could begin to heal. Brit. Jack's steady presence reminded her that she did not have to face the world alone, that sometimes the simplest acts of courage could lead to the most profound changes. Brit. As the sun set one evening, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Clara sat quietly on the porch, watching the hills stretch into the distance. Jack worked nearby, tending to the animals as always, his calm focus a constant reassurance. Brit. Clara realized that she had survived the hardest part, finding the courage to step out of fear, to seek help, and to trust someone. And in doing so, she had begun a journey that might lead to freedom, hope, and a future she had only dared to imagine in dreams. Brit. For the first time in years, Clara allowed herself to believe that life could be different. She had found a sanctuary, a mentor, and a protector in Jack. Brit. She had taken the brave step of seeking help, and that step had changed everything. And as she watched the sun dip below the horizon, she knew that while the road ahead would not always be easy, she no longer had to walk it alone. Brit. The days on the ranch began to take on a rhythm that Clara had never known before. Each morning she rose with the sun, her body waking to the sounds of animals stirring and the wind brushing against the fields. There was work to do, chores that demanded attention and patience, but it was work that had purpose. Clara felt her muscles grow stronger, her hands calloused in ways that made her feel proud. But for the first time she could see the results of her effort. The fence she mended held firm, the animals she cared for were healthy and calm, and the gardens she helped tend began to flourish.
Brit. Every small success reminded her that she could create order and beauty in the world around her. Even if her past had been chaotic, Jack noticed the change in her, though he rarely commented directly.
He would sometimes nod with quiet approval or hand her a tool. giving her the space to complete a task on her own. Clara began to understand that independence was not just about being alone, but about being capable, trusted, and respected. She started to take initiative, waking earlier to help Jack with the animals, organizing supplies, and even fixing small problems around the ranch before he asked. Each step of independence filled her with a quiet confidence she had never felt in the town she had left behind. Evenings, however, still brought challenges. Clara sometimes found herself sitting quietly by the fire, memories of her past creeping in despite the calm of the ranch. Shadows of fear that had haunted her for years would stir, and she would feel small and powerless again. But now she had Jack's steady presence to anchor her. He never forced her to speak, but he would sit nearby, quietly doing his own work, offering the comfort of company without judgment. His calm demeanor reminded her that safety could coexist with freedom and that vulnerability did not have to mean weakness. One afternoon, as Clara was working near the creek that ran along the edge of the ranch, she noticed how the sunlight reflected on the water, sparkling like tiny stars. She paused, watching the gentle movement, and realized how much she had missed noticing small details of the world. In the past, her attention had always been focused on survival, on avoiding anger, on hiding herself, on keeping her body and mind safe. Now, she could observe without fear, appreciating the simple beauty around her. The rustling leaves, the bird songs, the soft murmur of the creek. They were all reminders that life could be gentle, and that she was allowed to enjoy it. Clara's trust in Jack deepened over these weeks. She began to confide in him more openly, sharing not just her past, but her hopes, her dreams, and even her small victories. Jack listened without interruption, sometimes asking questions that helped her reflect, sometimes offering quiet encouragement. "You're stronger than you know," he told her one evening as they repaired a broken gate together. Clara smiled, feeling a warmth that was unfamiliar but welcome. For the first time, she believed that strength could come from kindness and support, not just from endurance or hiding. There were still difficult days. Clara would sometimes catch herself worrying about the town she had left behind, wondering if her stepfather or others would come looking for her. She had nightmares, vivid memories of fear and anger that haunted her sleep. But each time she found a new way to cope. She would rise early to work, write in a small notebook Jack had given her, or simply walk along the hills, letting the wind carry her thoughts. These routines became rituals of healing, ways for her to reclaim control over her mind and body. One day, Jack suggested that Clara try riding one of the horses on the ranch. At first, she hesitated, remembering the fear that had kept her cautious for so long. But he encouraged her gently, explaining the steps carefully and showing her how to connect with the animal. Clara's first ride was clumsy. She wobbled and the horse shifted beneath her in a way that made her heart race. But Jack's calm presence beside her, guiding her hand and offering quiet reassurance, made all the difference. By the end of the ride, Clara felt exhilarated, a sense of accomplishment bubbling up inside her. She laughed out loud, the sound bright and free, and for the first time in years, she felt a joy that was entirely her own. The days on the ranch also brought opportunities for Clara to think about the future. She began to imagine herself beyond the ranch, beyond the fear that had defined her life for so long. She thought about school, about learning new skills, about exploring the world outside the hills. Jack encouraged these thoughts, reminding her that growth and independence were possible, but that it required patience and planning. He helped her create small goals, reading certain books, practicing tasks on the ranch, learning to cook and manage responsibilities. And each small step gave Clara a sense of progress and hope. Yet healing was not linear. Some days, Clara would feel the weight of her past pressing down on her again. A harsh memory, a flash of fear, or even a sudden loud noise could shake her, making her feel vulnerable. But now she had tools to cope. She had Jack's guidance, the routine of work, the quiet of the hills, and the knowledge that she had survived before and could survive again. Each setback became a lesson, a chance to practice resilience and trust in herself and in the support around her. Clara also began to notice her own growth in subtle ways. But she laughed more freely, spoke with confidence, and began to take pride in her accomplishments. Tasks that had seemed impossible a month ago were now manageable. She started to care for the land and animals with a sense of ownership and responsibility, realizing that her actions had a direct impact on her environment. This connection gave her a sense of purpose that had been missing from her life, a feeling that she was contributing, that she mattered. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in deep shades of orange and purple, Clara sat quietly on the porch. Despair. She reflected on how far she had come, how much she had learned, and how her fear, while still present, no longer controlled her life. Jack stood nearby, tending to the animals as always, his calm presence a constant reassurance. She realized that the ranch had become more than just a place of safety. It had become a place of growth, a sanctuary where she could heal and build a future. Clara understood that independence was more than just surviving without danger. Desperate time. It was about learning to trust, to act with courage, and to believe that she deserved care and kindness. She had learned to take small risks, to face the unknown with careful courage, and to appreciate the beauty and calm in the world around her. These lessons were not easy, and they came with moments of doubt and fear. But Clara now knew that she had the strength to face them. Through all of this, Jack remained a quiet guide. He never forced her to confront anything she was not ready for, but he was always there, offering gentle encouragement and reassurance. Clara began to see him not just as a protector, but as a mentor, someone who had helped her find the courage to grow and the wisdom to heal. She realized that sometimes the most important lessons in life came from people who simply offered support without judgment, who believed in you when you could not yet believe in yourself. By the end of Part 4, Clara had transformed in ways she could scarcely have imagined. She had learned to trust, to work, to face fear, and to take pride in her accomplishments. She had discovered that safety, care, and kindness could exist alongside independence and strength. And most importantly, she had begun to see herself as someone capable of building a life beyond fear, a life where she could thrive, grow, and find happiness. Clara's journey on the ranch was far from over. There were still challenges ahead, memories to face, and steps to take toward complete independence. But for the first time in years, she felt equipped to meet them. She had found a sanctuary, a mentor, and a friend in Jack. And she had discovered a courage within herself that she had never known existed. The path ahead was uncertain, but she no longer feared it the way she once had. She knew she could walk it, one careful, brave step at a time. And as the stars began to appear in the night sky, Clara sat quietly, feeling a sense of peace she had never known before. The ranch, the animals, the quiet hills, they had become her home. And within her a new strength had taken root, one that would carry her forward into whatever the future might bring. The morning air was crisp and clear, carrying the faint scent of grass and earth. Clara stepped outside, taking a deep breath and letting it fill her lungs. The ranch was quiet, as it often was in the early hours, but to Clara it no longer felt lonely. It felt alive, full of possibility, desperate. She had been on this path for weeks now, learning, growing, and discovering strength she never knew she possessed. And today she felt a quiet determination, one that told her she was ready to take another step forward toward a life that belonged to her. Desperate. Jack was already up, tending to the horses near the stables. He looked over at her and gave a small nod, his way of greeting her without words. Clara smiled softly, grateful for the unspoken understanding between them. She had learned so much from him, not just how to care for animals or manage the ranch, but how to trust, how to believe in herself, and how to face challenges with courage. The lessons were not always easy, but they were changing her. shaping her into someone who could face the world beyond these hills. The first task of the day was feeding the animals. Clara moved with confidence now, handling the buckets and tools with steady hands. She noticed how the horses' coats gleamed in the sunlight, how the cows moved calmly around the fields, and how the chickens pecked at the ground without fear. Bees. Small details reminded her of the balance and peace that existed in the world, things she had almost forgotten in the chaos of her past life. The routine was comforting, but more than that, it gave her a sense of accomplishment.
She was capable. She was needed.
She was making a difference. After the morning chores, Clara sat on the porch for a moment, watching the hills stretch into the distance. She thought about her life before the ranch, about the fear, the loneliness, and the constant tension she had carried. It felt like a different lifetime. The thought made her heart ache slightly, but it also filled her with gratitude. She had survived, and she had found someone willing to help her when no one else did. Jack's quiet guidance and steadfast presence had shown her that she could trust, that she could grow, and that she could reclaim her life. As the day wore on, Clara and Jack prepared for a trip into the nearby town. It was a necessary step. There were papers to sort, appointments to make, and small matters of everyday life that could not be ignored. Clara felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. She had avoided the town for so long, afraid of judgment and confrontation, but now she felt ready. Jack reassured her, offering guidance and walking beside her, providing the quiet support she had come to rely on. The journey into town was slow, the dusty road winding between fields and trees. Clara's heart raced as they approached the familiar streets. But she reminded herself that she was not the same girl who had fled in fear weeks ago. She had grown stronger, more confident, and more aware of her own abilities. With Jack beside her, she felt a quiet courage building inside her, a courage that told her she could face whatever awaited her. Once in town, Clara handled the necessary tasks with surprising composure. She spoke to officials and filled out forms, navigating the small bureaucracy that had seemed overwhelming before.
Jack remained a steady presence beside her, offering guidance only when needed, letting her take control of her own decisions.
For the first time, Clara felt the thrill of independence, of knowing that she could handle life's challenges on her own, with support but not dependence. After their errands, they walked through the town quietly, observing the familiar shops, streets, and faces. Clara noticed that she no longer felt invisible or afraid. People passed by without judgment, and she realized that her fear had been a shadow she carried, one that did not define her. She could exist in this world without being consumed by fear, without hiding herself from life. The realization was powerful, and she felt a sense of liberation she had never known. Returning to the ranch, Clara felt a sense of accomplishment and pride. The journey had been more than just a trip. It had been a test of courage, independence, and trust. She realized that she had taken control of her life in ways she had never imagined, and that the skills and confidence she had gained would carry her far beyond the hills of the ranch. Jack noticed the change in her demeanor and gave a small, approving nod. Clara returned the gesture with a smile, understanding that she was no longer just a girl in need of protection. She was becoming a young woman capable of making her own decisions. In the weeks that followed, Clara began to explore more of the surrounding hills and fields. She walked the trails, observing the wildlife, listening to the sounds of nature, and reflecting on how far she had come.
Each journey was a reminder of her independence, of the courage she had found within herself, and of the beauty that existed in the world when fear was no longer the center of her life.
She felt a growing connection to the land, to the animals, and to the quiet rhythms of life on the ranch. Jack continued to mentor her, offering guidance on practical matters, problem-solving, and life skills, but he also gave her the freedom to make mistakes and learn from them. a crucial lesson in independence. Clara began to understand that growth required both support and autonomy, and that trusting herself was just as important as trusting others. Desperate, she discovered that she could handle challenges without panic, that she could make decisions with confidence, and that she could face the unknown without fear. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, Clara and Jack sat on the porch together, enjoying the quiet of the evening. Clara reflected on the journey she had taken, from a frightened, isolated girl to someone capable of facing the world with courage and determination. She thought about her past, acknowledging the pain and fear, but also appreciating the lessons it had taught her. She understood that her experiences, while difficult, had shaped her resilience and strength.
I never thought I could feel this free, Clara said softly, her voice carrying a mixture of relief and wonder.
Jack smiled, his eyes calm and reassuring. Freedom comes from courage, he replied. And you've found it within yourself. You've done the hard work. Now it's yours to keep, Clara nodded, feeling the truth of his words settle in her heart. She realized that freedom was not just a place. It was a state of mind, a confidence in one's own abilities, and a belief that life could be lived fully and safely.
Over time, Clara began to think about the future more clearly.
She considered continuing her education, learning new skills, and building a life that was truly her own. She imagined traveling beyond the town, exploring new places, and meeting people who would respect and value her. The thought filled her with hope and excitement, and she knew that the lessons she had learned on the ranch, resilience, courage, trust, and independence, would guide her through whatever challenges came next.
The ranch had become more than just a refuge. It was a place of transformation.
Clara had discovered her own strength, learned the value of patience and care, and built a foundation for a life that was independent and fulfilling. Jack had been more than a protector. He had been a mentor, a guide, and a steady presence that allowed her to grow. Through his quiet support, Clara had learned to trust, to act, and to believe in herself. As the stars appeared in the night sky, Clara stood quietly on a hill overlooking the ranch. The fields stretched out below her, bathed in the soft glow of moonlight, and the animals settled into their nightly routines. Clara felt a profound sense of peace, knowing that she had survived, grown, and reclaimed her life. The fear that had once controlled her no longer held power. She had faced it, overcome it, and emerged stronger, wiser, and more capable than she had ever imagined. Clara knew that challenges would still come, that life was unpredictable and sometimes difficult. But she also knew that she had the tools, the strength, and the courage to face them. She could navigate the world with confidence, make her own choices, and trust in herself and the people who had proven worthy of her trust. And for the first time in her life, she felt truly free, ready to embrace the future, whatever it might hold. Jack stood nearby, watching her quietly. He understood that Clara's journey was not just about escaping danger. It was about finding herself, building resilience, and learning to trust in her own strength. And as he looked at her, standing tall and confident, he felt a quiet satisfaction. He had been part of something important, helping someone reclaim their life, guiding them toward courage, and offering support when it was needed most. Clara took one last look at the horizon, feeling the cool breeze on her face and the warmth of the ranch beneath her feet. She knew that she was no longer defined by fear, by isolation, or by the hardships of her past. She was defined by courage, by hope, and by the choices she made each day to move forward. The ranch, the hills, and Jack's steady presence had given her more than safety. They had given her a foundation for a life filled with possibility, growth, and freedom. And as she turned to go back to the house, Clara knew that the next chapter of her life was just beginning. But she was ready to face it. Not as a frightened girl, but as a young woman who had discovered her strength, embraced her independence, and reclaimed her future. The journey had been long and difficult, but it had also been transformative, teaching her lessons that would last a lifetime. Brit. And for Clara, that was more than enough.